Welcome to Minerva. Today we're going to be discussing the moon landing.
Ooh.
First of all, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Duncan.
Hello.
We hope to give you enough information that you can go away and then do your own study. And there's plenty of study to go away and do on this topic. We're going to talk about this. So Apollo 11 was the first crewed mission to the moon. So the first mission to the moon that had people in it. And that was in July of 1969.
Yep.
Neil Armstrong was famously the very first man on the moon. And he said those famous words, "It's one small step for man.
A giant leap for mankind."
Very good. And
I'm glad I remembered that.
So that's what convention tells us.
Okay.
But there is conspiracy theories out there that say very different. And we're in an era of the Cold War. We're in an era where the Americans are essentially fighting the Russians, but not physically, in more of a kind of mental battle.
Yeah.
And so with that kind of conflict happening, and with things like the Russians having recently launched Sputnik, which was the satellite which was going around the Earth and certainly going over America 2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah.
It was a time when things were pretty strange, and I think you've got an experience from kind of living through that time.
Thanks very much. This is the 1960s we're talking about. I ain't that old. But yeah, obviously, yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, the Cold War, so like, we lingered on through the 70s and
Exactly.
80s, which was far more my time period,
Yes.
but cheers, thanks for making me feel so old to it. But yeah, no, it was. I mean, it's funny speaking to the children today in the sense of what they're learning for literature. I remember the literature I had at school was all post-apocalyptic.
Right.
That's what we were learning. I mean, we had TV programs, what to do if a nuclear fallout sort of thing happened. And so, yeah, that was very much the regime we were under. So, yeah.
Strange times, but obviously from a technological point of view, and I think that's where this starts to become interesting. It feels now, looking back at it, like, did we even have the technology to go so far? We've got more power in our pockets, in our mobile phones or in our smartwatches or whatever, than they had at that time in those moonlanders.
So you're saying we didn't have the technology to make the flight to the moon?
What I'm saying, I think it feels strange that we had the technology then, looking at what we've got now, having not been back to the moon since, that we managed to create such a feat at that time.
I suppose, yeah, but I think there's a certain thing to put it into context, isn't it? I mean, one thing is we use the word flight, and I think subconsciously when we take in the word flight, we assume, and we say manned flight, in a sense of like they were sitting there, oh, we're going to the moon, we were trying to get there. It wasn't. We strapped 3 guys to a rocket, which was basically an explosive to go in a direction. And so I believe there was even like a comment that one of the pilots turned around to the German engineers to say, "There's no windows." And the Germans were going, "What do you need the windows for? You know, you're not going to see it. We're basically shooting you at the moon." And I think even the calculation ones, like there's like the first IBM computers were being used, but they were still getting outdone by people literally doing the mathematics, as the Americans said, the math, you know, and they were it was down to. So really, what we were looking at is a missile that was shot at a rock that we could see, and so to be honest, it's like a big gun, really, isn't it? So to be honest, the only concept of actual flight, I think, would be a case of, wasn't it, a sense of the nose cone where it had the final sort of like landing point where they had to come out and come back in to pick up the lunar module.
Yeah.
So the only bit of flight they had was that, and then the other bit was when it came back round and they had to pick up the module again and then go, right, steer it towards home, lads, which to be honest is the big blue thing in front of them. So again, and I suppose we also, because our only real experience as individuals of flight is when we see in sci-fi and things like that. So we see something far more technically advanced than actually just shooting a rocket at a thing that we can actually see.
Yeah, and I think I mean, the way you're describing it makes me just think of this huge firework,
Yeah,
which is essentially what it is. But the Americans failed a lot, didn't they, when they were trying to build it in production? I think there was 20 failed like rocket attempts or something like that, which is it's quite a scary thing when you think about it. And I kind of worry, if I put that conspiracy theory hat on, is that the point when how you're having these failed missions that somebody thinks to themselves, we need a plan B here? With that background of the Cold War and all of the things that were happening in the hearts and minds of Americans, failure was not an option.
Oh, you say this as faking the moon landing. So you say this is the plan B.
Yeah, they needed. Did they need a plan B in case they couldn't do this? Because they had to. They had to feel that they were going to beat the Russians. They had to feel that they could succeed in this, and they couldn't fail.
I suppose. I think the political pressure to win would have been incredibly intense. But would it be enough to actually turn around and say for the plan B? I mean, the risks are phenomenal. Because let's say that the Russians were also doing theirs, and let's say they knew the Russians were close to it, and the Americans turned around and said, "We've gone there. We've landed with a landing module and the top bit's gone off, and that's going to be there with their flag."
Yeah.
The Russians land, filming, and go, "There's no flag, and they could have black and white proof of going, they weren't here."
Yeah.
And imagine going to America and going, I suppose they would go back and say, well, the Russians have faked theirs. Yeah. They're not actually there.
Yeah.
Then it would just be powerful telescopes looking and see if it's actually on there. But I'd have to say, I'd imagine someone had the thought to actually go, they would have had the thought. Did they actually do it? I think there's far more risks in doing it and getting caught than there is actually to actually do it.
I think I agree with that, and I think you're right. The more I think about the Russian aspect of this, them kind of being able to prove that they didn't would be absolutely huge. But again, going back, doing the research for this show, I think there's an astronaut called Gus Grisham, I think his name is, and he was one of the first guys, and he was the all-American who was going to be taking us to the moon, etc., etc. But he was incredibly negative about things. He held a press conference at a photo shoot where he got the other astronaut, all of them together, sort of did a praying sign over the lunar module, as if to say, we're on a wing and a prayer here. He also did another kind of press conference that was off the cuff, from what I understand, where he put a lemon on a coat hanger and hung it on one of the apparatus and said, in the American way, this is a lemon. This thing isn't fit for purpose, I suppose. And then those guys, incredibly sadly, were burned to death in a test. Yeah. Which I've always felt that when conspiracy theories point to this, it's almost quite disrespectful, because these guys, they burned doing something that they were trying to do for other people, and we off camera talking about this, saying these guys weren't paid a lot of money either.
Yeah.
So I wonder what your thoughts are around that technological point of view. Were they moving too quickly? The astronauts didn't feel that they didn't feel comfortable with going to the moon at this point because of the way that they were developing.
Well, I think it's very reasonable. I mean, we all know there's people with different mentalities. We know there's optimistic people, there's pessimistic people. We can imagine, I'd imagine with the actual very culture at the time, money wasn't the aspect. It was a case of, we have to beat the Russians. No matter what story or spin they put on why going to the moon, the passion was to do it. And I think, all of them were from military backgrounds, so I don't think it would be too difficult to play on.
No.
You are doing this for America. They have we have our Grand Union flag sort of thing, and great, nice flag. We have no feel, we don't have anywhere near the same feeling that Americans do towards theirs. So money, not so much of an aspect. But I must admit, if you're there at the project at the very beginning, and you're seeing this failure, and there's a launch date, and they're very much, we've got to beat the Russians, so okay, you're more concerned about winning this than you are about getting this right. and you are going to sit me into this. I mean,
That's
look
a
at
scary thing.
I mean, if you look at the size of the rocket, and you see, and you put it into scale, they're in this tiny bit at the end, that is just fuel, and which of course they're just watching this thing blow up, and blow up. I mean, we've mentioned the word that they were German, but we all know that at the end of the Second World War, that we had they were the German scientists who were building the V2 bombs. Yeah. And I mean, if you look at those, they're the same things in the sense of the how many of those blew up on site, sort of thing. And they're seeing this. So we've got the German scientists being spread between the Russians and the Americans. So the Germans work for the Americans. They're still going through this learning process where they're not doing missiles now. They're actually trying to project people up to the moon. Yeah. And if you see it not working, I think part of me would be going, I'd like to be there. I really would like to come back. But again, we did say this off camera, and I think this is the point to actually, as I like to say it here, which is if they did fake it and they got the 3 astronauts to say, right, we're not ready yet, we're going to film it here, and but it's top secret, you can't tell anybody. I mean, one, you've got all the background crew have got to be silent, but you've got the 3 astronauts not doing it. For them to survive re-entry, I mean, if they killed, I'm sorry, if let's say the conspiracy theory is there that the first 3 got killed because, we need a fresh batch, we did that. Logic would actually, if they're willing to do it to those 3, it would be logical to say that they've gone to the moon, and as they came back, just to make sure nobody says, well, actually, no, we didn't. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, they didn't make re-entry. Very sad. We're going to slow down the project now. Well, America did make it. We were the first to the moon. That would make more sense than survive and running that lifetime risk that they'll go, well, actually, I have this own photograph. There's the camera crew. There's so-and-so. I think it's too much danger there.
No, and I think that does make a lot of sense. So let's go through, I mean, the conspiracy theorists over a long period of time have been throwing accusations at why we didn't go to the moon. And I think it'd be good to look at some of those. So the first one would be, and we've sort of spoken about this, but the space race, right, to beat the Russians. How important do you think that is in, as a reason for going?
Oh, phenomenally. I think so, phenomenally. I mean, we look at... it would be nice to know the other side in the sense of what was going on in Russia. But from the US side, we know how much, I'm going to use the word persecution, in the sense of if you had anybody had any link, that even historically, to a communist party, which if you just look at it, it's just a case of is a different political idealism. I know we relate it to being Russia, but we've got China, we've got Korea, etc. But that's all it was. But if you showed any sign towards communism, that was it. Your career, you were up against the Senate, you were there, your career was ripped to shreds. I mean, famously in the entertainment industry, how people's careers, it was just over. It's just you couldn't interact with them at all. The negativity, for want of a better phrase, towards Russia and communism was phenomenal. And so if you've got a government that is against this ideal and say, look, it's so wrong, it's so unproductive, and they are beating you technology-wise, going up in the space. You've got the JFK telling us, we will have a man on the moon by so-and-so. And the Russians, they got the first, I think it was that they got the first, well, in this case, they had the satellite. I do wonder about the propaganda of, the elliptical orbit would be the logical distance for the satellite to go. But I'm sure the Russians were very pleased of, it's over American space, it's over American. But also, I think they got the first dog in the moon. It's definitely the first man in space. They were so ahead. How could the American government maintain this antagonism towards a regime which is clearly, or at least visually, so advanced?
I think that's what makes this compelling because, a decent conspiracy theory always has a really good motive. And this has a very good motive. Right? I think, and if that's the only one, that's really for me almost a good enough reason or a plausible enough reason. But there are other things that people point to, like there are photo anomalies. as you go through, and people have done this for years, going through the photos. I think big ones are like the shadows.
Yeah.
We see.
We're not talking about Hank Marvin.
No, we're not.
Yeah.
But the shadows from the rocks we see, the fact that there were no stars in the sky as well. In all of the pictures, the sky or the atmosphere looks completely black.
You do worry me when you say it like that, because you say it with like, hey, the skies are black. Like, isn't it so? But we both kind of know. Well, I think we both know, because we have. I think when I said it before, you either are nodding in agreement or a case of, oh, he's off in his tantrums again. But yeah, we know that the shadows, in the sense of the rocks, isn't it? There'd be rocks, so they go off in different directions, so therefore must have been different lamps for that to actually happen.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's been shown so many times. Even if you go into the desert and you put rocks in, the shadows will go different directions, because not only do you have the primary light source going to it, but when it hits an object, light bounces. And so we do it with the prism, where we can bend light through glass. When it hits one surface, it will ricochet and go another, which will change the shadow of the object that's nearby. So you will have going up in angles. I think we know ourselves that. In a city, we get things that we call it light pollution, isn't it? Where you've got the street lamps are brighter than the stars, and so our eyes won't distinguish. It can't do it, and a camera won't distinguish between the two, and so it will end up being black. And again, you'd hope if there was a director putting it together to get it right.
Yeah.
But when you watch any science fiction film, they put the stars in the back, knowing that, well, actually, you wouldn't see it.
But that's what people want to see.
Yeah. And so, and considering we're looking at early ventures into space, how aware would they have been about light pollution being so evident on a place we haven't visited? So, again, it seems more probable that we did.
Yeah, and I mean, going at these other sort of conspiracy theories and the big ones, we see one that I think a lot of the public picked up when they first saw the pictures is when they planted the American flag in the moon, which, you know, is an incredible moment. The flag waves as if it's in the cool breeze.
Yeah.
And it waves, and a lot of people said, well, why is that waving? There's no atmosphere. It should just be dead. It shouldn't move.
Yeah.
But of course, I've seen, you know, the Discovery Channel do a TV program called Mythbusters, which is quite a fun program.
Yeah.
But they actually tried to prove this, and they create a chamber and they put the flag in, they move it, and of course
it's the slow move. You said if you try to do it ordinary, it will flutter, but it very quickly loses its momentum and slows down. You look at the footage, and it goes on for a bit. It just there's no atmosphere. But also there's no breeze. There's nothing to actually stop momentum once it's already going. Yeah. But on the photographs, there are ones, though, that do kind of, even for me, the cynic, go, you know, that's not good, isn't it? There's ones where, I mean, I've only read about the ones where there's like got C's on something like rocks to make them. What was that?
Well, I think there's rocks, and they've got like a C shape on them, which looks like they're carved. They're incredibly strange, and there's lots of theories as to why they are. But some people point to that and say, well, that's because it's a prop.
Yeah.
And you would put the C underneath.
Yeah.
But you would know that it's. But I mean, why you would need to know if a rock is a rock or a prop, I don't know. But some of the theories are that was a hair on the lens, or it was something like that made it look like that. But they are incredibly strange, so worth looking at for people interested.
Yeah, because there is one. I remember watching one program where. And it was the shot, and they had in one photograph which was catalogue dated by NASA, and it had this ridgeway going on. It had the rocks in the place, and in the background it had the landing stage of a previous landing. Yeah. So the lunar module had gone. It was just the base.
Right.
But then there was another photograph which was clearly the same. It's slightly different, very slightly different angle. So we know it's a secondary shot. Yeah. It has the ridge, has the same rocks. It's dated afterwards. But there's no lunar module at the back.
Wow.
So, of course, unless they decided to dismantle it, why would it not be there? And NASA apparently has turned around and said, it's our mistake. It's when not when the dates were literally taken or something. It's the case of when they got registered.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's like a case of, you can think of somebody making that mistake, but also you think of NASA being, we're here, scientific research, cutting edge. We catalogue the things over. It's not like you've got your wedding photographs and your holiday photographs for the year, and at the end you go, oh, let's file them, and you've
That's
got
an administrative error, but quite a huge one.
quite
right?
a big one, isn't
Yeah.
it? You might do,
Yeah.
So, and there's another one quite famous because, of course, there's the crosshairs on the camera lens.
Yeah.
And apparently there's one. I've seen the footage. Again, I don't know how real the image is itself. The shot's there, and in the shot is one of the lunar buggies.
Yeah.
But where the crosshair is, the lunar buggy cuts off the crosshair.
Right.
So it's on top of it, which can't be because the lens goes through. And it's... The photograph is clearly fake. And so it comes up with certain things, like a case of, is NASA... I mean, I couldn't actually say, I don't know it well enough if it is actually a NASA photograph that's been released. Or someone has doctored it and go, NASA verify it. And because I'm sure NASA gets it, verify this. Yeah. If you verify one thing that you know that's not true, you end up verifying everything. Yeah. And if you choose just to do that one, you go, you've denied it, but you're not even looking at these. So that goes in. But, I mean, we talked about this before, a sense of what other reasons there could be. And we wonder if there is a human error, not so much the sense of the filing system, but the missions, the grants that comes to the government to get them going up. No disrespect to any astronaut that may have done it, but imagine someone that you've spent millions getting this man to the moon, clearing up his rocks with his dustpan and brush. He's got his camera, and he says he lets the camera lens on or something, or something just goes wrong. Say the camera doesn't go, and you come back, and the senator goes in, right, we're paid 16 million, you get to the moon, let's see the photographs, let's see what we've got. What happened to the camera? It didn't work. Well, get some of the old ones out, get something else. Oh, this is what we have. I can imagine that happening. We've seen it with, like there's that wonderful things, the guy who did the pyramids, wasn't it? It's like he had... the funding was running out just on the last day. He just happened to find in the pyramid of Cheops's signatures of things like almost like Cheops was here. It wouldn't put it past. I wouldn't put it past those powers that be just to continue the funding. Say this is worth it. That those sort of things happened.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there are so many of these smaller points which are definitely worth anybody interested in this as a topic. Even if you look at this through a fun lens and just just interested.
Crosshead or not.
Yeah, crosshead or not. There are plenty of things out there, but one of the ones I'd love to hear comments on in certainly below the video, and also on our Facebook group that we run. If you're interested and you want to join us on Facebook, search Minerva Study Circle, and you'll find both me and Duncan are active in the group. So if you've got questions or you want to suggest show stuff, you can do that as well. But I'd love to hear people's comments on there about what we're going to talk about next, which is whether or not Stanley Kubrick was the mastermind behind it.
The mastermind. The James Bonds.
The James Bond. So if you don't know, Stanley Kubrick's a famous film director. He, just before we got to the moon, he had released a film, 2001, A Space Odyssey, which was incredibly famous, but obviously on this topic. And I think if anybody was going to be able to do this, if anybody was going to be able to have the detailed approach and obviously almost the kit to create a sound stage and to create a movie set to fake the moon landings, it was Kubrick. Could
he do it? Yes. I don't think there's any question about it, especially if you look at what he did for 2001 Space Odyssey. I mean, there's that famous scene where normally it has the overture going in, and he's got the camera where there's the space air stewardess, isn't she? Yeah. She's carrying the tray and she's walking, but he moves the camera so she looks like she's just walking in. I mean, it's brilliant. And the photographs, the scenes he does for where they visit the moon to see the monolith. Yes, I'm sure he could do it, but there's certain practical things to think of, isn't it? It's almost like to have done it had to be top secret. And yes, he would be able to direct it, but he still need he wasn't a set builder or designer. He wasn't an engineer to do it. He wasn't a sound engineer. And I'm sure the government had their own your documentary crew, but this is specialist stuff.
Yes.
So not only would you have to keep Kubrick silent, which I'm sure enough money would do it, but all his crew as well. I think that's a lot to do. And the other part, there is a case of, to have faked it in any way, the risk of the Russians finding out, it's too much. But it's like, surely we must know Kubrick's life so well that it's like if we had Spielberg today,
yes,
and he disappeared for a year to knock out, a secret film for the government, and a couple of his friends were his top designers, I think we know. And I think if Kubrick did, we'd be looking at some point of the lost years of Kubrick.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's a really fair point. But I also do come back to this, this thought that if you were going to ask somebody, it probably would have been him. And actually, a lot of people point to the fact that one of the films he made after was The Shining, which famous horror movie, visually stunning. And Kubrick is known that everything visual that he puts in his films, he considers. Mm-hmm. So he's massively over the detail of like the art direction of everything. The Shining is based on a book by Stephen King, who famously said he didn't like the film. He didn't like what Kubrick did to it. It didn't feel right. He changed a load of stuff, and it wasn't the same story. But everybody else thinks the film is incredible. Mm-hmm. One of the things that he changed from the book to the film, which I find quite interesting, is one of the rooms that they highlight in the hotel that they're in the film is number 217. That's what it is in the book.
Yeah.
But of course, in Kubrick's version, in the film, it's 237. And 237 is the average distance between the Earth and the Moon. So instantly people think, well, why would he make such a small change? And there are others. If you look, and we looked at the photo before doing this, if you look at the background of the film where there's a fireplace in the hotel lobby, it's very clearly, for me, got a rocket or rockets on there. It just seems like so out of place.
Keep going.
I'll keep going. Danny, the small child in the film, he wears an Apollo 11 jumper.
Yeah.
Which again, like, it could just be anything. It could be because he's from that time, but it feels a strange nod to something when you've got all of these other coincidences. And of course, and the one that I will debunk myself, because I got quite annoyed by this, researching it. I'd always heard that the carpet was very significant throughout the film. And you see that pattern over and over again, and people talk about that being a significant part. However, when I looked into it this time to sort of do a bit of research, it said that is supposed to represent what the launch pad looks like, the NASA launch pad. It looks nothing like it. It really doesn't. But the other 3 points, I'm more than happy with.
I said the boys' T-shirt is the most compelling. I mean, Apollo 11. It is, it would seem rather tip of that.
It's quite on the nose, isn't it?
It is. But you've got an entire film. I mean, to actually convey it, and I know so about the rockets in the wall sort of thing, but the other part is a case of to sell a film, to get it within its audience. The landing on the moon, speculative or not, hit the nation, and so reference to it on the boys' T-shirt. He would be as proud as punch, being American. Yeah. It's an American film. Throw that more greater thing of the all-American stuff. Hit against the nutter coming through the door with an axe, It's that sort of parallels. But it's not unheard of. I mean, like Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's a famous scene where Indy and his friend are pulling the ark out of the Egyptian temple. And on one of the pillars, in the hieroglyphs, of all the hieroglyphs there's a hieroglyph of C-3PO and R2-D2 from a previous film, Wow. And so if Kubrick is paying homage to maybe not the space, but his own, 2001, it's not unheard of. So, yes, it's, he's wearing a T-shirt that says Apollo 11. How relevant that would actually be is evidence or a subtle hint that he actually filmed the moon landing. I think we would see if that was the big secret thing, and I wouldn't just do it in my next film, it would be regurgitated through the others. If you've got that amazing secret going on, I'd have it. I mean, I also talking about the rockets. Again, well, going to Star Wars, no, George Lucas film, there's a famous scene where they're in the first film, I say first film, 1977, the Star Wars, now called New Hope, let's not go there. There's a bar where there's these lamps going down, and in the second film, one of the lamps is used as a robot, where you utilise props, it's cheaper. So if Stanley Kubrick's has got to decorate a fireplace, which is so far in the background, all right, we need some depth in here. Okay, we've got some rockets, cut them in half, vroom, 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 it's done. Is it meaningful, or is it just using what's around to keep the budget down? I don't know. I don't think it's conclusive enough to say that Stanley Kubrick was filming. There's too many loopholes.
I love to believe that. I love to believe, because it's such a romantic theory that this great director directed the best thing of all time, right?
Yeah, it would be. I wonder what if it's the casting call. You know, he had the three. Can you read some lines to me here? I've got the line here. Was it one small step for man? You know, but yeah, I don't know. No, I don't see it.
No, I think one of the other things, it'd be weird for us not to talk about a topic without trying to involve Freemasonry. Yeah. And there is Freemasonry involved in the moon landing because Buzz Aldrin was a Freemason, very famously, and apparently he took a Scottish Rite flag all the way to the moon, all the way back, and I do believe that I've read somewhere, and people please leave this in the comments and confirm this, because it's probably more known to American Freemasons, that they actually constituted a lodge for the moon, so like the Moon Lodge or something like that. I'm sure it was number 2000, if memory serves me correct. So please do let us know if that's
going to have to be a name, isn't it? I mean, not to reveal any secrets, but there's got to be a certain amount of people in the lodge, and we only know there was only 3 on that flight. Yes. You know, actually only 2 landers. The other guy was just going around.
Exactly. Maybe he had special dispensation, as it's the moon, right? But no, I think there is this lodge held for it, and of course he took that flag there, he brought it back, and he put it in the Washington Museum, which I think is a pretty amazing thing to do.
Mason has been on the moon.
Exactly.
Fabulous.
So, like, for me, final thoughts. In all of these topics, you know, I love looking at them and trying to really dive deep into them as much, going down the rabbit holes as much as we can. And I've done that on this over the years, and I've done that recently in trying to research for this. I do think there were too many people involved. There were thousands of people that were actually working on trying to get America to go to the moon, and I just don't think you can pull the wool over their eyes. And I know there are some complex theories where they all thought that we went to the moon, but really this other thing. I just can't see it. I can't see that. And I also think with modern technology, we've now started to see other countries who have done high resolution pictures of the moon, and there's stuff there. Yeah. It's so hard now to, for anybody to really have that smoking gun, I think, of say this definitely didn't happen.
And I think, as we've said before, or in context, that we know one of the driving forces underneath was this race between.
Yes.
If it was faked, I think the people who would have shouted the loudest about crying "it's fake" would have been the Russians. Just as the Americans were watching the Russians, how successful they were being, the Russians would have been watching the Americans. And if there was any hint at all, I mean, they would have to, the radar of actually checking the rocket was going up, how far it would have gone, etc. The re-entry part, they would have had all eyes on it. And if there was any hint of going, well, hang on a sec, they would have been the first ones to scream. They had nothing to lose. Yeah. And they didn't say a thing.
No, and I think to leave people with a thought, actually, it's just one thing that slightly hangs around in the background that's a bit hazy is, why haven't we been back?
Well, for me, I think it's got money. I mean, it's a case of when we look at even like the later Apollo missions, although, I mean, even when we had the space shuttles going, we were still doing experiments of what life would be like, or what could be sustained life in space. But when we're looking at the 70s, late 70s, I think we went to the early, I can't remember where the last Apollo missions went, we weren't really advancing scientifically that much more. You know, we were basically going up, take a photograph, bring back rocks, go up, bring back rocks. the cost of just getting the same rocks and the same photographs. I know that there were stories about we were looking at it as being a staging process. I mean, you've mentioned earlier the case of to build something that could have been a almost like a space dockyard, where you could have built something to go further into space. Yeah, great idea in theory, and possibly even practical. I mean, we do, we've got the International Space Station, etc. But if we're looking at something, we're looking for a bigger sustainable part. We're looking at something that's going to be like 50 years in the making. Right. And that's just to do the dockyard itself. Yeah. Now, for the capitalist side of the West, I would imagine if Russians' communism had worked and it had carried on, they would have had a better chance, because their government, politically stability in the sense of it has the one ruler goes, then the money to be put in it would have been constant. There'd be no worry about that money going there because it's a rule of law. But in America, when you've got Republicans, you've got the Democrats, we don't know who's going to be in the next term. Are they going to commit the several millions it takes to do it? Well, that's actually a Republican thing. We're doing this. There'd be no practical to investing into it. I suppose the closest we got again was when the Americans got again was when the space shuttle started going. But again, funding runs out. It just can't. It's not sustainable.
Well, I mean, who knows what the future holds? Elon Musk is looking at doing things like this as well. So there's lots of interest, and this is. When we do these videos, we do these for people. We try to give that surface level, and our opinion, obviously.
It's definitely surface
level. But what we're trying not to do is create 3 or 4 hour long videos where we deep dive, because we want people to go away and do that themselves. But we love hearing comments back from you guys, either on the Facebook group or below on YouTube, just to tell us your opinions, but also where there might be other things we could have discussed as well. So. It's really great to hear those comments and to talk to people that like and certainly appreciate the show. But our next topics are going to be interesting. We're kind of keeping on we'll give a little bit of something away here, but we're keeping on the space kind of theme for a short while, which is going to be very interesting. So please do subscribe to the channel. That really helps us out. And we both look forward to seeing you very soon.
Cheers. Bye.